One thing is that all the people having these arguments are upper middle class people and some middle class people, but mostly upper middle class educated people. For those people are all in the same class. So for them, the salient differences they see are differences that have to do with identity groups and status, right? Maybe they have poor cousins, but they don't want to hang around with a poor cousin. They don't want to go to their barbecue. So they're disconnected from the working class. And so they paint a fantasy of the working class that's based largely on their own experiences, which they project onto the working class without actually seeing what the working class really needs and wants.
So if you could wave a wand and change anything that would solve the problems of everything bagel liberalism / build, state capacity, what would you do?
No one's going to like the answer when I say this.
Hey all. Today on Moment of Zen, we caught up with economist and no opinion writer Noah Smith on the morning after July 4th. We cover the future of American politics, the Chevron ruling, Project 2025, civil service depolarization, and UBI.
Hello, Erik Torenberg.
Noah, happy 4th.
Yes, happy 4th. America. Actually, should I get my little American flag and wave it around?
Yes, please. Yes. Let's go.
Oh, and I have the Made by Immigrants America shirt.
Amazing. Let's go. Did you have a good 4th?
Yeah, I did. Hung out with some of our mutual friends. Saw some fireworks.
Love it. Love it. We've got some good mailbag questions today. And shall we get to it?
All right. Are we doing Q&A today?
Yes. I did also just want to start, if okay with you, by just asking if the debate and what's happened since changes anything for you in terms of, did we learn anything new from a substantive or policy perspective? In our last episode, we did sort of, some reasons to be, we've analyzed Trump and Biden and their various, pros and cons of what they would, come to the table with. And I'm curious if the last week or two has changed anything, or if it's, you wrote a post about, hey, maybe Trump is likely to win, and maybe that's the change. But I'm curious if we've learned anything new from either candidate's kind of policy positions.
I don't think we've learned anything new policy-wise. I think that we've learned that Biden's age is more of an issue than his handlers had been letting on. And, Republicans have been saying this for a long time, and it turns out they were right about this. Biden was pretty sharp in the early days of his presidency, and I think that the stress of governing, takes a toll over a while. And I think that, he's just an extremely old man. That effect adds up.
If you're the Democrats, what do you do in this situation?
Well, I think you have to switch Biden out for, Kamala Harris. I think that, and that means the Democrats are going to lose. I think that's probably why they're resisting doing it, because Kamala is a young person in the Democratic Party, younger person. And she's sort of has, Biden, this is the end of Biden's political career one way or another. And, so if Trump is likely to win, then switching Biden out for Kamala might seem like sacrificing Kamala, sacrificing her political career. And so I understand the reluctance to do that, but it does increase the chances that Democrats will win the election. So I think that Trump is still the favorite to win against Kamala, but I think that Kamala will actually be more likely to win than Biden will be at this point, given his age, even though she's not more than 50% likely. So although there's, I think they should switch her out, but I also think, practically it probably doesn't matter because Trump is probably just going to win.
Do you think Michelle Obama or any candidate could have a better chance of beating Trump, or could actually beat Trump? And if so, is it worth kind of trying to make that happen?
I think Michelle Obama probably would have a better chance because, people fondly remember the Obama years. It was before unrest began, and Barack Obama's a great guy. And yes, Harris is uncharismatic. She's a little bit Hillary Clintonian in that she's sort of the worst of all worlds to all people. Liberals, progressives think she's a centrist or, whatever, a cop. And then everyone else thinks she's like a raging leftist. And this is exactly what happened to Hillary. everybody, like conservatives, thought Hillary was a crazy leftist, while all the, progressives were unenthused about her because they thought she was centrist. And she just tried to be all things to all people and ended up being exactly the opposite of that. I think Kamala does the same thing. She's an opportunist. She's not charismatic. She is, well suited to being like a DA. She was a great DA, but she's not suited to this kind of politics. And I think she got trounced in the primary in 2020 for a reason. And so I think that maintaining her political career, not subbing her in order to maintain her political career for like 2028, she's just going to lose. She's not even going to win the primary in 2028. Like, this is her only chance to be president right now. So, and I think Michelle Obama would be better, but it would be sort of a Hail Mary pass. Like Michelle Obama has no experience holding political office. But I think that looking at democracies around the world, you see like, wife of beloved former leader, it is a good strategy. Like, that wins a lot. And so I think that if Michelle Obama had any desire to run, I'd swap her out instead of Kamala.
But no Hillary?
No.
It's over. Kamala does, like Trump, has quips that are very memeable, the sort of unburdened by what has been line. And maybe that counts for something.
What's that line from?
I don't know exactly what the context was or what it means, but she's very memeable, and maybe that counts for something.
Maybe. We'll see. The problem is, I think that the people surrounding Biden are very insular, arrogant, and unaccountable. They're the kind of people who think that what matters are their conversations with Democratic interest groups, like, behind the scenes. That everything is like that, back rooms are what's important. That's where things happen. And maybe we should have a society where back rooms are more of what happens. Maybe the primary process has weakened our democracy, but that's not the world we live in right now. And the fact that these people you think they could get away with concealing Biden's aging for such a long time is not a vote of confidence. Those people are not doing well.
It sparked a conversation about like who is actually running the country. Like, is it Biden? Is the president? Is it quote unquote the deep state? Like, what is the right mental model to think about, like, who's actually running the country right now? Because when people see Biden, they're like,
right. So what's happening is that there are a number of, the country is being run by people in a number of like fiefdoms within government. So pretty much, Jake Sullivan's running national security stuff. Gina Raimondo is running like, commerce stuff. Like, people are running their departments. All these things are run as like independent fiefdoms with no real decider at the top, except occasionally, once in a while. And so that's what's going on. But the question is, who are Biden's political handlers? Because Gina Raimondo and Jake Sullivan are probably not the people sitting there saying like, oh, you need to stay in. They're not the people prepping him for debate. Those are people actually governing the country. So who's running the Biden campaign and who's governing the country are actually two completely different questions. And people who conflate those questions should think a little harder. So I think that a lot of the Biden appointees to actually run the government are very good people. I think Jake Sullivan has done a great job. I think Gina Raimondo has done a good job. I think Janet Yellen has done a pretty good job. I think that most of these people have done good jobs. Lena Khan, maybe not, but a lot of those people have done good jobs. But the people who are really screwing up are the political team, the election team, the campaign team. That's who really screwed up. And I don't actually know the names of those people, but they screwed up big by thinking that, I think that in their minds, they're still probably stuck in this imaginary 2020 where they feel like there's this big groundswell of just progressive support, which in 2020 came from COVID, anger about COVID, I think. And that groundswell is completely evaporated. That was gone in 2021. I mean, like, that's been gone for a while. And I think that they didn't feel like they had to answer to the country and to the public. They thought that like the country would just take care of itself and they do their own thing behind closed doors. That has proven to be wrong in a pretty disastrous way. So those people have fucked up big. And so we need to learn the names of those people and criticize them appropriately.
Yeah. When people complain about, and I'll get to a question right after this, but it's related. When people complain about this, the deep state, this idea of a kind of an unaccountable group of people who, wield undue influence and are unaccountable to the public, but also you can't be controlled by either president. Is that accurate? When people are people, is that directionally accurate or is that misguided?
It's not even directionally accurate. It's a little bit of fantasy. The deep state is, it's a little bit of mild conspiracy thinking. It's a construct that doesn't exist. There is no deep state. If there were a deep state, Trump would probably be dead or in prison or somehow neutralized, right? The idea is the people who imagine the fantasy of the deep state imagine it as a, this mighty thing that can yet be overcome by the power of Trump. But the point is, Trump doesn't have that much power. Not that many people are coming to his rallies. His approval rating is bad. He doesn't have anywhere near like the popular support that he did in 2016, right? People are mostly tired of the Trump show. They're going to accept his return, but they're not super enthusiastic about it. And there's sort of the groundswell of right-wing energy that was there in 2016 doesn't exist now. So the point is that there's no like super valiant Trump mightily somehow overcoming this looming deep state. That's fantasy. The thing is that if there were a deep state, Trump is weak enough. He has so many attack surfaces, right? He does so much corruption. He's committed so many crimes, right? Something would happen to push Trump out of the way. The fact that Trump hasn't been pushed out of the way shows there's no deep state. It doesn't exist in any meaningful sense. It's an indulgent bit of fantasy that people tell themselves because it's cool to live in a world where there are deep states and conspiracies and wheels within wheels and secret forces, moving the world behind where you can see and taking care of things. That is a cool world to live in, but it's not the world we live in. The world we live in is a headless world where basically no one's in charge and they're just running around like chickens with their heads cut off or hunkering down in their own little fiefdoms, hoping that the rest of things everything will blow over. That's what's actually going on.
Was Bernie Sanders taken out by the DNC, or is that not the right way of thinking about what actually happened to the Bernie campaign?
Well, Bernie Sanders could have won if people had voted for Bernie Sanders in the primary. I think that has to be your basic thing that you think about. Like, had people actually, there's a little punch card or like a little electronic thing, depending on what kind of voting machine you use. You can use that to put Bernie Sanders, and people did not do that. So the question is, why did they not do that? Did the DNC use mind waves to, did they implant chips in your brain and make people not vote for Bernie? Did they somehow control the media in ways that destroyed Bernie's campaign? Like, what did they do to prevent people from pulling that lever for Bernie, from making that mark for Bernie in the voting booth? What did they do? And so that's the question we have to start with when we ask, did the DNC take Bernie out?
When people make these complaints on both sides, right? Like, or on the left, people will talk about Russian election interference, and that's why Trump won. And on the right, people will talk about, sort of Hunter Biden election, Twitter suppression, and that's why Biden won. In both, is it basically what you said? It's about why people voted. It's not this external influence. That do you buy sort of election interference?
I don't discount the possibility that you can, mind control people and sway them. Like, I don't discount the possibility that people just vote for who the New York Times and CNN tell them to vote for. I don't discount that possibility, or that like the Russians are sneakily using social media to blah, blah, blah. I do think you need to actually like draw that causal arrow instead of assuming it exists somehow. Like, if you're going to say the DNC made everybody vote for Biden instead of Bernie in the 2020 primary, how did it happen? Come up with a theory, and then we can test it.
It's the Hillary 2016 one.
Hillary 2016.
Yeah, Hillary Bernie for the nominee. People will say, Bernie could have maybe won the nominee, but was sort of told to step down or something like that.
No, that didn't happen. Like, he was not.
He just lost.
Yeah, he just lost. I mean, it was a narrow victory. It wasn't like it wasn't like a sliver. It was a fairly narrow victory. There was a huge groundswell of support for Bernie within the Democratic Party. It just wasn't enough to overcome sort of, name recognition and status quo bias that made people vote for Hillary.
Yeah, makes sense. Let's go to Ben in San Francisco. Ben asks, hey, Noah, can you explain the Chevron ruling decision and what that means and how us abundance Democrats should feel about it?
I am not a legal expert, so I can't, I'm not the best person to explain this. But my understanding basically is that laws are vague. And when you take someone to court over something and say, okay, you're not allowed to do this, the regulatory agency, says, you're not allowed to do this. We're suing you because you did this and you're not allowed to do this. And then the court says, okay, let's decide if you're actually able to do this. So when that happens, you have to adjudicate the law, and the law is vague because laws are not computer code. They do not handle every possible series of inputs, right? They have to be interpreted. And so what Chevron did, the idea of Chevron deference was that when the law is vague, then the court has to ask the regulators what they think the law means, and the regulators get to decide what they think what the law actually means in those cases, where the law is vague, which is a lot, is basically the regulator gets to say, okay, we have interpreted the law to mean this and this, and you, the court, you have to accept this interpretation as the correct interpretation of the law. Now, that never applied in cases of, major political significance, or there was the major doctrines exception. And so what that means is that if the judge thinks, oh, this makes a big difference, how it gets interpreted actually makes a big difference. Well, now you're not allowed to defer, right? Only if you think it's like a minor point. Yeah. So this is a bit of an incoherent doctrine. And because it was incoherent, it had been applied increasingly less over the years. So this is my understanding, not a lawyer. And so Chevron was kind of like, in fact, it really wasn't making much of a difference anymore. It could make somewhat of a difference in the future. One thing it could do is that I think, and I've read some other people say this, is that it could increase the burden on courts. Because now, so you know how when you want to build something in America, you just get sued by NIMBYs who sue you under NEPA, right? So you're not allowed to build this house. You're not allowed to build this factory. You're not allowed to build this power plant, whatever, right? You get sued. And then you get tied up in court for a long time. And the court's like, well, okay, you have to do this big review. And now let's read your giant review. And it lasts for years. And so you might as well not do it. Now imagine if regulatory agencies can do the same thing. If regulators can be the new NEPA, right? What if regulators can just sue you in court and say, hey, you're not allowed to do this? And you're like, well, yes, I am. And Chevron deference is gone. So you don't even know what the rule is. So the court is like, okay, guys, let's figure it out, over the next 5 years. So this could increase regulators' power if regulators learn to be like NIMBYs and simply tie you up in court and exert the chilling effect of the threat of litigation, of years-long litigation on companies that want to do stuff. So obviously that's not going to happen under a Republican president who appoints a whole bunch of anti-regulation people, but under a Democratic president, imagine Lena Khan as, NIMBY in chief, able to say, okay, I don't want anything you do. I mean, obviously Lena Khan's not in that exact regulatory role, but imagine someone with her general attitude, or Tim Wu or one of these guys. Imagine these people who are very suspicious of corporate activity, just being able to tie you up for years in court by suing. And the court is like, okay, let's figure out exactly what this law means. What's the response to this? Well, Congress is like, okay, well, I guess we need to really just specify, to make laws more like computer code and specify every line of them. So let's get some generative AI to do that. And so they write these, we already have these insanely long laws. So imagine that 10x, right? And of course, nobody's going to be able to read them without generative AI. And so we're just going to have AI versus AI wars with these giant, insane, binders of legislation stacked to the ceiling. And of course, it's government, so you have to print everything out on paper so you get to actually see the binder. And so that's a clown world, right? So that's the worst case scenario. That's the bad scenario, is clown world, where regulators just sue everything into oblivion and the courts are not equipped to adjudicate all these lawsuits. I don't exactly know how to prevent that clown world, but that's what should make people scared.
So in that case, it would have the opposite of its impact.
Yes. Well, think about this. The Chevron doctrine was made, was sought by Reagan people. It was Reagan's deregulatory regulators who wanted this. So because the courts were trying to enforce regulation more stringently than the Reagan appointees, right? The Reagan appointees were like, okay, we want to interpret this thing to mean that companies can do what they want, because that's who the Reagan people were. And then the courts were like, no, we were going to stop you from doing all this stuff because that's what the law says. And the regulators were like, no, actually, we're going to reinterpret the regulation to be more permissive, right? So they sought out Chevron deference and they got it. They got that deference. The Reagan people got that deference. Chevron deference was a deregulatory move.
Fascinating.
Be careful what you wish for.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. If you don't already subscribe to Turpentine's industry-leading newsletters, like our new daily AI newsletter, Emergent Behavior, or Media Empires, you should. But that's not what I'm here to tell you about. The platform we use to power these newsletters is called beehiiv, and it's excellent. First of all, it was started by the same early team who helped build Morning Brew into a $75 million newsletter business. And they built beehiiv to offer that same powerful functionality to anyone sending emails. From essayists to business owners, the platform is beautiful, their text editor is intuitive, and they help you scale your audience with custom growth features. beehiiv has powerful tools to help you monetize your content. You can easily launch paid subscriptions or pursue an advertising model. The beehiiv platform will even connect you to premium brands to sponsor your newsletter. Not only do we use them, but thousands of the top newsletters in the world also use them, like Milk Road, Blockworks, the Lindy newsletter, and so many more. beehiiv's founder hooked up Moment of Zen listeners with a sweet deal. Get 20% off for 3 months with code MOZ. Visit beehiiv.com, that's beehiiv.com, to get started. Fast forward to the end of 2024. Think about your goals. What can you do right now to give yourself the best chance of succeeding? If learning a new language is on your list, you absolutely need to check out Babbel. Babbel offers a range of learning tools, self-study app lessons, live classes, and even podcasts, which have always been my favorite way to learn. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel isn't just a game to kill time and make you feel like you're learning a language. It's not overly academic or rigid either. It's all about learning language for the real world. Babbel stands out because it's designed by real people using a modern conversational teaching approach. It's not always easy, nothing worth doing ever is, but it's straightforward and designed to help you start speaking in just 3 weeks. With Babbel, I was able to brush up on my intermediate Spanish to ramp up for travel to Argentina last year, and was able to set clear goals based on how much time each week I wanted to practice. Join millions of Babbel language learners across all age groups. Here's a special limited time offer for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners, at babbel.com/zen. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/zen, spelled BABBEL.com/zen. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Yeah, I heard that one intended effect is basically to shift power from sort of certain government employees who are most likely to be more Democrat to the judiciary, which is more likely to be Republican or more Republican certainly than the government. Is that way too simplistic of a read, or is that incorrect?
It's not clear because so Democrats definitely outnumber Republicans in the judiciary. The Federalist Society has done an okay job getting some conservatives and Republicans in there, but they're still outnumbered. They're just not massively outnumbered because remember, we have severe education polarization in America. Almost everyone who goes to law school is a lefty. Right. So then the fact that the Federalist Society has managed to, if 10% of the people who go to law school are righties and the Federalist Society manages to get 25% of the judiciary, that's a huge accomplishment on their part, and they're still massively outnumbered. Right. So imagine that in the civil service too. So I think, Project 2025, a lot of people are scared. It's going to turn us into a fascist state. Okay, well, no, what Project 2025 is, it's an attempt to get conservative appointees into the civil service. It's the Federalist Society for Civil Service. That's what it really is. And of course, that a lot of people have reason to be scared of that because they're going to make abortion much harder to get, and they're going to make birth control much harder to get, and they're going to do all these things. And yeah, they're going to do conservative stuff because guess what happens, people? When you elect conservatives, conservative things happen. You must go vote. If you don't want those things to happen, you must go vote for leaders who don't want those things to happen, who will not do those things. Voting matters. We have 50% turnout or less in this country, less than 50% turnout in this country. If you don't like the consequences, you must vote. Anyway, instead of sitting around on Twitter saying, your vote doesn't matter, both parties are the same, and it's a uniparty. Okay, well then, finem respice, see what you get. Zama miro, as the Japanese will say.
Yeah. This relates to a question Jonathan has. Jonathan says, if we had someone like Milei who's committed to ending the administrative state, would that be a potential solution to the problems of everything bagel liberalism, or would that be throwing the baby out with the bathwater?
It would be throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Well, I mean, so Milei's doing some good stuff. He's actually managed to tame inflation. So he's doing good stuff on the macro front. The problem is that there's a lot of stuff that we need a competent civil service to execute. And we've seen at the state level, we've seen what happens when the government slashes the civil service. Because then there's stuff that people demand the government do. They demand to build transportation, highways. You want a fucking road. How are you going to drive without a fucking road? You're not going to get private companies being able to buy all the land and get all the right of way to build a dense network of roads. You'll have a few toll roads that you're just sitting on forever and pay a giant toll. That's what happens every time you have only toll roads. Okay, so you're not going to get that big network of roads without the government. So people want the government build me roads. Okay, well, who's going to do it? Either the administrative state is going to say, okay, here's how we're going to do it. Here, we're going to plan this road. Here's how we'll pay the contractors and blah, blah, blah. Or it can outsource to a bunch of consultants, to a bunch of, in many cases, nonprofits to do like housing and education stuff, right? They're like, government, we need, educate our kids. Government, give these people housing so they're not sleeping on the street. Okay, fine. Well, then how are you going to do it? Well, either you do it with the administrative state or you do it with a fucking nonprofit that just grifts you, because how do you know when it's grifting you? Because they're like, oh yeah, we're going to provide housing for the homeless. And then San Francisco gives them like millions and millions of dollars and they just pay themselves out and don't do shit for the homeless. Guess what? That happened because the administrative state was replaced with an arm's length privatization model. Nonprofit reliance is privatization. And the government just gets built and built.
If the nonprofit was a for-profit, would that solve the issue or no?
No, because the consultancies are for-profit. And yet, people are like, we can't build any trains. Well, guess why we can't build any trains? It's not because the bureaucrats don't want to build trains and are holding up the building of government infrastructure. No, they want the government to build stuff. The thing is, it's getting held up because instead of, many reasons, but a big reason is because they're just paying these consultants. We don't know how. Remember, we can't build it, son. We don't know how. That's a copy pasta, right? It's a trope. It's a meme. But the reason we don't know how is because we fired the people who knew how and they didn't teach another generation of people how to do it. So they hire consultants, and the consultants don't really know how because they're, 23-year-old, people who didn't know what else to do right out of college. And so they don't know how to build a train. They've never worked as a civil servant in Japan, building trains in Japan. They've never worked in a country with competent trains, and they don't go to those countries and they don't know. They simply, run a regression on some available variables and charge you through the nose for that, that thing. And maybe the regression even has significant coefficients. But the point is that the in-house expertise of the civil service is gutted. And people are like, we'll just cut the government. But you're not cutting the government. You're outsourcing the government to people who are actually worse.
So if you could wave a wand and change anything that would solve the problems of everything bagel liberalism / build, state capacity, what would you do?
You're not going to no one's going to like the answer when I say this, but that's why you have a podcast. The answer is Project 2025.
Oh, okay. Say more.
The answer is to get a bunch of conservatives into the civil service. Not so the conservatives dominate the civil service, because they never will, because of education polarization, right? Almost everyone who wants to go into the civil service and is qualified for it is a Democrat. But if you get it more nonpartisan, more politically, unpolarized, then you'll have a bunch of people in the civil service who, are willing to, who say, okay, what we really need to do is cut down on expenditure. What we really need to do is do this stuff, is spend less and eliminate boondoggles. And then the progressives in the civil service say, but we need to get it done. And they'll say, okay, well, let's just get it done cheaply. So you need to have that balance there. A politically balanced civil service will be a civil service that Republicans feel more comfortable about beefing up as an alternative to nonprofits and consultants.
Wow. That's really interesting. It's
I told you wouldn't like the answer. Nobody likes the answer. Noah supports Project 2025. Well, no, because obviously Project 2025 is also going to do a bunch of stuff like restrict abortion rights, which I'm not for, right? I don't like a lot of the specific ideas that they have. But in terms of depolarizing the civil service, education polarization has fucked our country in many ways. And unfortunately, the Federalist Society is probably the only case we've seen of depolarization within institutions. The judiciary has become a less polarized institution, thanks to the Federalist Society putting their thumb on the scale. And, obviously they don't have institutional power to put their thumb on the scale, but they cultivate talent, right? It's sort of like a small but fierce, well-organized prison gang can actually hold off the larger, more disorganized prison gangs. Well, that's what the Federalist Society has been like. And that's what Project 2025 is trying to do for the civil service. And something like that is necessary in order for the country to not have a choice between nonprofit grift and, everything bagel contracting requirements.
It's pretty fascinating. It reminds me in a very different way, forgive this comparison because it's a bit of a crazy one, but just the logic behind it. The neo-reactionary Curtis Yarvin endorses Joe Biden for president because he thinks Joe Biden is better at Trumpism than Trump is, both on a practical level, policy level, but also he thinks Trump hurts his friends and helps his enemies, basically. Like the New York Times gets so much bigger, ACLU gets like all these institutions get so much bigger under Trump. And then like similar logic of like, in a very different way of like, hey, if we get more conservatives in government or the civil service, perhaps liberals will be able to more effectively achieve their goals, is kind of the logic I'm hearing for you.
Well, I mean, Curtis Yarvin he's silly, but he's not stupid. And so he's right, obviously. Thermostatic politics is a thing. Wokeness got supercharged because of a reaction to Donald Trump. When I was at the height of the Floyd protests, when people were pulling down statues of like Ulysses S. Grant and Abraham Lincoln and things like that. And I was, texting a guy and DMing a guy, Rev Howard Arson on Twitter, that guy, Andres Shu, internet pugilist. That's his thing. But anyway, I was DMing him and I was like, look, man, this is bad. He's like, no, we have to support this because Trump is in office. It's like, okay. That's what that does, right? Like, obviously the Floyd protests had some element of anti-lockdown protest to them, but that wasn't the whole story. A lot of it was anti-Trump protest, right? Where were the protests the most intense, and where do they actually burn stuff? Well, Portland, because Portland's nuts, and I guess everyone got tired of like locally sourced like artisanal small batch chocolate and having a mustache and vest, and they just decided, okay, what's the next thing? What's burning things? But okay, so that's Portland, but then like Minneapolis, where Floyd was actually killed, right? Had some actual real riots that burned down the neighborhood, right? Like they used to. And then old school 60s style riot instead of the modern, like, oh, the police pushed me in the, like that, instead of that, right? Like it was an actual old school riot in Minneapolis. And there was also people near the White House, people burned stuff. People charged the White House. Like it was anti-Trump, right? That energy. And so of course people are exhausted now. So if and when Trump wins, it'll take a couple of years for the backlash to begin, but you'll see the backlash. You'll see it in 2025, which is when, it's the first year of a president's presidency. Halfway through the first year, the popularity tanks. Trump's popularity at post 2016 tanked after Charlottesville, Biden's tanked after Afghanistan, but it's really just the first year. So we'll see the Democrats retake Congress in 2026 when everyone starts hating Trump. If Biden somehow manages to win, or if Democrats swap in someone who manages to win, we will see the conservative backlash in America continue to build for 4 more years. And then in 2028, we can see a very enduring conservative wave. Like, so that's, the Carter years prepared the way for the Reagan Revolution. But with Trump in power for, 4 more years, he's such an asshole. He does so many illegal things, and he's just feuds. He's such a jerk who just feuds constantly with like everybody.
It's interesting. We haven't seen kind of a Democrat-led, moral panic or social movement, however you want to describe it, in quite a while. Maybe because they had a good run and enough kind of antibodies were built up.
Yeah, look at Palestine.
Yeah, okay, that's true.
They tried, right? The Palestine protesters, they tried really hard. Like they got all the junior staffers, the Biden junior staffers, like go and like don masks so no one would know who they were, but do like an anonymous, like threatening sort of, we are your staffers, we will betray you because for Palestine sort of protest. And they got every university around the country, and yet it got squashed. The university administration just called in the cops, expelled some people, fired some top, some people for like, countenancing anti-Semitism, being soft on anti-Semitism. And that was kind of the end of it. And that was possible because Biden was in the presidency. With Trump in the presidency, the Palestine thing would have gone grassroots, or would have had a much greater chance of going grassroots. Obviously, exhaustion's part of this. Exhaustion figures into this. There's less energy to like resist than there used to be. But, Moldbug's right. Yarvin's right that under Trump, that, resist energy will be rekindled, and wokeness, quote unquote corrective discrimination at every facet of society by, like the school board in Iowa, or like every little, institution in our society will be viewed as a local act of resistance against Trump. And the quashing of wokeness that has happened will not completely reverse because exhaustion, right? A lot of that fire has burned itself out, and a lot of institutions destroyed themselves with woke infighting, blah, blah. But at the national level, like the existence of that festering sore of Trump in the White House will cause local wokeness to get a shot in the arm. And Moldbug's right about that. So guess what? Prepare for that. Get ready for that. Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, exactly. That's the theme of this episode.
This is the be careful what you wish for episode.
Yes. Perfect. I'll make that the title.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Hey all, I'm hearing more and more that founders want to get profitable and do more with less, especially with engineering. Listen, I love your 30-year-old ex-FANG senior software engineer as much as the next guy, but honestly, I can't afford them anymore. Founders everywhere are trying to turn to global talent, but boy, is it a hassle to do at scale, from sourcing to interviewing to on-the-ground operations and management. That's why I teamed up with Sean Lanahan, who's been building engineering teams in Vietnam at a very high level for over 5 years to help you access global engineering without the headache. Squad, Sean's new company, takes care of sourcing, legal compliance, and local HR for global talent so you don't have to. With teams across Asia and South America, we can cover you no matter which time zone you operate in. Their engineers follow your process and use your tools. They work with React, Next.js, or your favorite front-end frameworks. And on the back end, they're experts at Node, Python, Java, and anything under the sun. Full disclosure, it's going to cost more than the random person you found on Upwork that's doing 2 hours of work per week but billing you for 40. But you'll get premium quality at a fraction of the typical cost. Our engineers are vetted top 1% talent and actually working hard for you every day. Increase your velocity without amping up burn. Head to choosesquad.com and mention Turpentine to skip the waitlist.
Point specifically, would you support an expanded administrative state? Sam Obergia came up with the idea of maybe we reduce the government in half in terms of employees, but pay everyone 2x the amount, i.e. try to get much better talent in government. What are your thoughts?
Well, okay, so maybe. So Samo doesn't actually know how labor intensive any of these tasks are. I don't really know how labor intensive they are, but I also know that Samo doesn't know. The idea of paying civil servants more is very good. The idea of cutting the number of civil servants, I don't actually know. My sense is that we've turned some branches of the civil service into dumping grounds for the incompetent. That's where we'll put our incompetent people because I guess we can't hire them for business, and I guess we can't hire them for the military, but we're just going to dump them into the civil service. Maybe so. So firing those people, the less competent people of the civil service, would be useful. But will those be the people who get fired, or will it be people who are on the wrong side of the political divide? Right? Will a Republican president fire incompetent people, or will he fire, people he think like progressives or Democratic appointees? To what degree are those the same people? How much does this overlap? So like that's an important question there. And so I don't know whether the firing is a good idea. I think it's just something that's meant to get attention. That's an attention-getting proposal. And it's one of these proposals that gets attention by being a little outside the box. But just because you get attention for being outside the box doesn't mean you've actually gotten a good idea. Sometimes the good ideas are inside the box. So maybe just funding the civil service more and raising and, recruiting better people to the top.
Right. But some people are like, the Department of Education, why does that even exist? Or it's net negative. You're not one of those people. You think all the departments that we currently have should exist and should just be, if anything, better funded.
Well, what does the Department of Education do?
I don't know. What does it do?
Does that mean it's useless? Or does that mean that we don't know if it's useless and it's just something people shout about because nobody knows about it, so it sounds good to shout
about? Probably the latter for most people.
That's my bet. And so Department of Education is controlled locally and funded at the local and state levels. The government can help with certain things. It can dish out a little extra education funding. Is that bad? Probably not. It also does some stuff for universities. Is that bad? I don't know. Universities have gotten too big for their britches and have become too, sort of top heavy as institutions. Is the DOE facilitating that? I cannot tell you the answer to that. So I don't actually know. What I do know is that the DOE budget is tiny. And so in fiscal terms, it doesn't mean shit. And I also know that the main things that our country needs to build have little to do with education at all. We're pretty good on education, honestly. Like, we need to beef up our math skills, but other than that, like, we're actually pretty good. Like, on international tests, Americans outscore most other countries, right? And the only thing that brings down our scores is like there's a few poor schools of poor people that bring down the averages. If you just cut those off, America would just beat everybody. And so we need to increase, the progressives are right on education. We need to increase equity, right? We need to put more resources. And yes, money works in education. Like, so you're like, resources, you just want to dump more money to, yes, I do. Because it works. It verifiably works. You just want to give more money to the poor kids. Yes, I do.
What about something like the teachers union? If some people say that the teachers union sort of prevents sort of innovation because you really want to protect teachers, even if it means keeping bad teachers in power. I guess, do you sympathize with critiques of the teachers union? And if so, could anything be done, or is that just a cost of doing business in democracy that they have so much power?
The key thing about teachers unions is that they are not students' unions. Teachers do not naturally have students' interests in mind. Some do, some don't. Every teacher has their own interests in mind. They want to get paid. They want job security. They want money, right? And so they get a decent amount of job security. They don't get a lot of money, right? They want it. They don't get it. All right. They get job security in exchange for low money, low salaries. What we need to do is have an experimental model that spreads. So charters can help fix this, of course, and charter schools can help fix this. But what we need to do is pioneer a model where we pay teachers a lot more in exchange for being able to fire them a lot more easily. Where teachers, if they succeed and are good teachers, get high salaries. But if they fail, you're out. It will require us to spend more money. Resources, we will need to spend more government money, taxpayer money, your money. Let's spend it on it because we get good quality teachers. But in exchange, the crucial part of the exchange is that if you're a bad teacher, goodbye, go find another job, go flip burgers, go do whatever, go be an influencer on TikTok. I don't know.
If it's a money thing, why is our education, if this is true, I hear that our education is not great relative to some other countries on a per dollar basis. Like, don't we spend a lot and don't get a ton for it relative to some other countries, or is not the case?
It's hard to tell because America is so much richer that, if you're comparing actual dollars, those other countries have much lower wages, right? Our labor costs are just higher because we're a rich country. That's what comes with being a rich country. You get high labor costs. So that's just Babbel, right? That's Babbel costs. That's a big part of it. Is that the entire part of it? I think maybe not. I think we focused a lot on doing a very expensive thing to improve education, which is reducing class size. So we've taken classes down from 30 to 17. I don't remember what the exact numbers are, but the point is we took class size down a lot. It's very expensive because you have to hire so much more labor. Just do the math. If you're smaller class sizes, means hire more people. So we hired more people, but that has only a small effect on educational quality, where the big effect from having high quality teachers we've essentially ignored. So if we were to have high quality teachers and pay them more, we could actually have them have the good teachers teach larger classes and actually still come out ahead and come out fiscally ahead. So that's probably the solution. But a lot of our increased costs relative to other countries are just Babbel. The fact that you live in a rich country, labor is expensive. That's what happens, right? The United States, in terms of its effectiveness of its education system, we don't pay that high a percentage of GDP for K through 12. It's only in dollar terms because we have a higher GDP. And in terms of the effects, right? I definitely do not want to turn this into a racial thing. I'm just using it as a proxy that we know for socioeconomic status, right? If you look at white kids in America do better on international, carefully taken standardized tests, PISA, TIMSS, all these tests. They do better than kids from Taiwan and Korea, right? They do slightly worse than kids from Singapore, which is a city-state that focuses on high-skilled immigration. This is all American kids, even including poor. This is even including poor white kids. So race is not the greatest proxy for socioeconomic status. It's just one proxy. If you just looked at white American kids, they'd be almost beating everyone in the entire world with a pretty moderate percent of GDP spent on education. It's not a terrible outcome, right? The problem is that poor kids, if you proxy for poor kids as Black and Hispanic kids, they are doing still not terrible in international comparison. They're doing sort of South Europe level. They're doing about as well as kids from Greece and Bulgaria and Romania and these countries, right? They're doing that well, which is not terrible, right? Like, Romania was a country famed for its prowess in math, and like, Black American kids are doing as well as Romanian kids. Okay, fine. So like, they're not doing terrible, but there's big inequity. There's like inequity. There's big inequalities within the system, right? I don't know if it's an injustice, but it's like, it is a problem. We need to bring up the level. It's like all are like, nice shiny suburban schools. Those are fine. Those are as good as schools in Taiwan and Korea. Except in math, they're a bit worse. In science, they're a bit better, right? But in math, they're a bit worse. So we need to make American kids do more math. So that's a thing, but that's a relatively minor thing compared to like the fact that like you have all these poor kids who basically aren't getting an education at all. And one reason is because their schools are very violent, disruptive. We need better discipline. There's a very small core of disruptive people in poor schools that you need to just like kick out, send them to reform school. Right? Just remove so everyone else can sit there and learn. And then you need to pay really good teachers to go in there and because the less teaching you get from your parents, the point is these kids don't get any parental help, right? They need parental help. They need teachers to substitute for parents in terms of early childhood education and all education, really, high school too. And so like you need really good teachers. Like you remember Jaime Escalante? Are you old enough to remember him?
No, I don't remember.
Okay. Jaime Escalante is this famous teacher. He like went to, inner city schools and basically like made them math champions. He's like one of the best teachers ever. They made movies about him in the 90s. He's a, extreme talent. That's on the extreme level, but there are a lot of people like that. Okay. There's people like that out there. You just have to hire, you have to find them. You have to give them the classes. You have to pay them, so they don't go into like, making ed tech or, whatever, some alternative, a lawyer. I don't know. You need to find them, pay them, a competitive salary and like fire the other people and give those students to the people who actually work. You need to do that in the poor schools.
Just because we're on the topic, why do you think when people talk about redistribution or fixing for equity in sort of education or the workplace, whether it's affirmative action or DEI or initiatives like that, why do you think it has become, or it was sort of race or gender based rather than just economic based? Because there's no better proxy for, socioeconomics than economics, right? Is it because it's just politically, we're so anti-communist or something that we just don't like economic redistribution, but there are rich, women and rich minorities that maybe they'll support, other kinds of redistribution. But why do you think that is?
Well, America in general is a class society that is always desperately trying to pretend it's not a class society. Social class is very important, independent of race. And yet, everyone always wants to make it about race. And this is on both sides of the political aisle, all right? So you talk about progressives thinking like we need racial stuff is more important than class stuff, which is a big argument in like 2016 with the like Bernie people versus Hillary people. And the Bernie people had a point. Class stuff, it's not the only thing that's important, but it is important. But, one thing is that all the people having these arguments are upper middle class people and some middle class people, but mostly upper middle class educated people. For those people are all in the same class. So for them, the salient differences they see are differences that have to do with identity groups and status, right? So that's the salient difference for them because they don't hang out with the poors. They don't go to poor neighborhoods. Maybe they have poor cousins, but they don't want to hang around with the poor cousin. They don't want to go to their barbecue. And so they're disconnected from the working class. And so they paint a fantasy of the working class that's based largely on their own experiences, which they project onto the working class without actually seeing what the working class really needs and wants. And this is a very widespread problem. And this is true of the Bernie people too. So the Bernie people are no like angels in this regard, because the Bernie people, like I remember talking to this woman who was incredibly passionate for Bernie. She was a lawyer. I met her at a party in Berkeley in 2017. And I was like, okay, describe a member of the working class. And she described someone who had gone to a good school, but who wanted to be a teacher, but lack of, funding of education is now forced to be a sex worker. That was her idea of the working class. In other words, her idea of the working class is like basically a version of the people she knows. She thinks of the most working class person that she knows. She thinks of a gifted, highly educated underachiever who gets sort of onboarded into the sex work culture. like mostly that's not the working class. Whether you want to call that the working class, that person working class or not, they're certainly not representative. That's not a common, but the idea that like this woman had no idea about like, would definitely not think about like, a second generation Mexican American who has a small business installing fire alarms and that's not working class, or like someone who works for that business, or someone who cleans your house. Like this woman didn't like, I'm sure she'll hire house cleaners, but they are robots to her. That's not a working class. That's not like the work that's a robot. That's a statistic. Why isn't my house clean yet? Tipping 10%. I don't know. The point is that like those people are out of fucking touch because America's society has allowed everyone to be out of touch. Where we had the big sort where everybody moved to little political bubbles, right? We also had class sorting too, assortative mating, assortative education, right? So like, we live our lives with the alumni of people who went to like UMich and Stanford, right? That's who we know. That's who we hang out with. And that's tech people are really terrible about this, right? You ever see any bartenders at tech parties? I know precisely one person in tech who hangs out with bartenders and is friends with bartenders. And that is Rune. Rune is a man of the working class. I mean, me, but I'm not actually in tech.
You're honorary in tech.
I'm honorary. But then like, people don't know the working class. So when my dad is a professor, and I remember when I was a kid, when there were people, doing housework outside, he'd always go talk to them. He'd always go hang out with them and talk to them. And sometimes he would bring them beer, which is bad because you shouldn't drink on the job, but it was the 90s. So, then you could bring beer to the workers on your lawn, and the guys would just like pop a beer and hang out with my dad, right? My dad was a construction worker when he was young. He was never working class in the true sense, but he did working class jobs for many years, right? To put himself through college, and then just like, he started construction work when he was in high school, and then, then did it all through college, put himself through college and then grad school. Like he even did some, although I think he did fuck up his back too. He always had this, like, he was like, working class people are people. We didn't hire people to do work in our house. Even once we got to the point when I was, later years of high school, we got to the point where we could have been able to hire those people. After my dad is old now, and he hires people to like mow his lawn and stuff like that because it's hard for him to do it. His hips are messed up, back's messed up, all this stuff. But he feels guilty about it. But he also like talks to them and hangs out with them in a way that I don't see a lot of people do. With he always impressed on me the idea that the working class people are people. That the person serving your milkshake at McDonald's is a person who's having a day, right? They're not just a robot who serves you. They're not just some loser. They're not, people think, oh, you're educated, you made it, you didn't have to be a loser. That's thinking in partial equilibrium, right? To bring a little economics terminology jargon into it, that's thinking like, oh, I don't want to be a loser like those service industry people. Yeah, but if you have a world in which someone has to be the loser, that's not a great world.
Right. I have a related question. Maybe we'll end on this one. Kristen Berman asks or says, hey, Noah, you wrote about the outcomes of the basic income experiment that didn't work out. Should we discount a UBI? If so, what model of poverty reduction do you ascribe to / what should be tried more?
Okay, so first of all, actual UBI, where like you make a livable income just off of free money from the government, is never happening. Good luck, goodbye. Okay, so because it's too expensive, right? Way too expensive. What will happen is unconditional cash benefits of a more limited degree. And we almost got that with the expanded child tax credit before people canceled it. And it's coming, right? And it's coming for two reasons. Number one, progressives want to add it onto their existing welfare system. And conservatives, like Charles Murray, for example, would like to replace big pieces of the existing system with that. So whether you want it as an add-on or a replacement, everybody realizes that cash benefits are pretty good, right? Giving people cash is better than most of the, food stamps are still good and like some targeted things are still good. But like giving people cash instead of like just unconditional cash, like you don't have to show work requirements, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you just, here's a check, right? Just for being you, because we love you, because you're an American. America, we support our own, right? And so that's coming. That's a real thing. We're already, and we moved toward that in the age of the EITC and the CTC under Clinton, right? We moved away from the old model of welfare, the old Rooseveltian model of like, let's do a whole bunch of tests and see if you're really unable to work, and then we'll give you welfare, which led to people trying to game the system, because of course you have to, because like there's all these tests to, so we're like, okay, no, you know what? Here's money. And of course, EITC and CTC are still conditional in that you have to earn a little bit of money before we give you the rest of the money, right? But so, and a lot of people argue for ending that. A lot of people arguing for giving it to people who can't work and blah, blah. And there's good arguments for that too, right? So, but the point is we move toward cash-based benefits, and we're going to move more toward that in the future. That's a good idea. Does it reduce poverty? You bet it does. It's good. Will it solve homelessness? No. We must moderate our expectations for what these anti-poverty cash programs can accomplish, right? Just because they can't fix everything in the world does not mean they're bad, okay? Like basic income experiments consistently find that they improve people's lives. And not only that, they don't just let people buy more food, though they do, right? You do get to buy more food, but what it does is it frees people up to focus on the long term. So one consistent finding with these experiments is that the people who get these checks get better jobs and they go get more education. Why? Because those are both risks. Leaving your shitty job as a, janitor or whatever to try to get like a better job in like an medical office somewhere. That is a risk, big risk, to leave that job. Going and getting like a degree to like, I don't know, like a stick stuff in people's arms. That's a big risk. Right? That's an even bigger risk than switching jobs. Those are risks. And when you're living on the edge, you can't take risks. Once the world is de-risked a little bit for you, once life gets a little de-risked, you can take those risks and better yourself, right? The safety net allows you to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. And that's one thing conservatives should appreciate. And of course, progressives should appreciate it as well. And so cash benefits are the future. They won't do everything. They won't solve homelessness. They're not a magic bullet that just defeats everything. The UBI messiahs, right, out there who like, oh, AI is going to put you out of a job, but don't worry, the government's going to give you, like $1 million a year. Okay, that's science fiction. Someday we may do that. Right now we can't afford it.
Yeah. That's a great note of realism, but also optimism to pragmatism to end this podcast. It's the America episode. Be careful what you wish for episode. Noah, as always, a pleasure. And until next time.
Until next time, sir.
Hey, everyone. Erik here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at eric@turpentine.co. That's ERIK at turpentine.co, and let's partner together.